So what is functional movement? Functional movement is a movement that is done opposing gravity, meaning going away from the floor, and has to have rotation. A functional movement also includes your vision. It includes your fine motor skills, which also, for me, I include the spine and breathing into fine motor skills. I look at those as a functional immature movement. I'm not talking about immature necessarily here, but the way they're responding. A mature movement is when you can teach someone it. The difference within movement lesson and what we have to offer is because we identify and look at and strengthen those foundational functional movements. But also functional movement comes into play with structure. Hi guys. I wanted to talk about what is functional movement. Most of you are more familiar with milestones, right? Milestones are very important, but they're also very static, right? This is one of the reasons why I like to see a video, because I want to see the function behind the movement. For your cognitive abilities, and I'm talking about you, as well as for your child, a functional movement is needed to sustain the body and also to sustain and grow the brain. A movement in general might be a static pose or rote or patterning, but that does not change and affect truly the muscles and the brain. Look at it this way. I can go to a gym and just lift a weight, right? And I can change my muscle mass with that weight and show marked improvement. And that's what a lot of people like. They like the measurements of movement. However, what they're not looking at is the measurements of how that child or you are organizing that movement. So that's why when a lot of people go leave the gym, right, and they quit for 2 to 3 weeks, they lose all their gains very quickly because what they were doing was not functional. You really see this in outer space. This is why I wrote my book, You Can't Get to Mars Without Me. The reason is that they're doing load lift variations in outer space, but they're not functional movements. This is how I was really proving movement lesson. I didn't expect to stumble on 21 new theories of biological gravity, but what I was using was I saw basically astronauts turning into cerebral palsy, which I've posted into this, and showing the similarities of when the system, the body, does not have a functional movement. So what is functional movement? Functional movement is a movement that is done opposing gravity, meaning going away from the floor, and has to have rotation. That seems like a lot. Now go to feed yourself. I'm opposing gravity with rotation, turning a page of a book. If you lied down right now on the floor, right, and had to get up, and I say don't use rotation and don't try to oppose gravity, you can't get up, right? And this is where you're coming to me saying, my child's not rolling over, right? But again, the way that someone rolls over needs to be functional, right? Assisting grabbing a leg, let's say, to get them to roll over. You see an exterior movement and go, my child just rolled over. But if they can't initiate it through their interior movements, it's not going to get replicated, or it'll be a rare occurrence. But then again, your foundational movements come into play. If the rolling over is not there, then coming to sitting through the back, grabbing the feet, all of those kind of movements become impaired. However, the way I look at your child too, a functional movement also includes your vision. It includes your fine motor skills, which also, for me, I include the spine and breathing into fine motor skills because that's what it is when you're an infant, right? They're not gross motor skills. You and I can hold our breath for 4 seconds, right? You cannot ask that of an infant, right? They can't control. And even if I were to do a whole breathing exercise with you, this is why, again, I don't practice those things. I have my breathing course. It's free for you and for your kids. But if you practice all the breathing that you want, like let's say if I upset you, wait a minute, I have to catch my breath kind of thing. But those kind of reactions cannot be done when you're sleeping. So when you're working with a functional movement, the functional movement has to have that rotation. I dress myself. Now, one of the first articulations at 5.5 months, that's why your baby is jumping on your lap, because they're starting to articulate the thumb from the pinky, right? These are your self-help skills, the feeding, the dressing, all of that, picking up things. Later on, the pinky articulates against the thumb. That's brushing your hair and doing those kind of movements, right? Telling time. And this is also why you don't ask your 2-year-old to take dishes away. They don't have certain movement vocabulary yet. I look at those as a functional immature movement. I'm not talking about immature necessarily here, but the way they're responding. A mature movement is when you can teach someone it, right? Just because your child's walking at like say 12 months, 14 months, they can't teach walking. As far as they're concerned, 1 foot somehow, they couldn't even say that. You know what I mean? They're not thinking of where their bodies are in space. This is why most of their movement milestones happens before cognitive comes into play. So when you're looking at the difference within movement lesson and what we have to offer is because we identify and look at and strengthen those foundational functional movements, right? I can sit there all day long and put my arm out, right? And do that. I'm capable of doing it. It is not a functional movement. I can't feed myself. I can't dress myself. I can't do anything with this. You will not see a child do this. You will if they're at risk for CP. That's why, too, that I can catch these little movements that are starting to have a conversation that really shouldn't be there in your child's life. That's another thing with the baby. With functional movement, it's always, again, opposing gravity. A baby doesn't suddenly say, or even a 3-year-old, I should have been rolling over by now. We start saying that, but that's not in your child's way of organizing movements. One of the things I have in my 7 essentials is can't versus can't. I say it all the time. I've been to Bhutan and it's an amazing place to be. But if you've never heard of the country, you're not buying tickets. It's not that you can't go to Bhutan, you don't even know it's possible. So when you don't have those good foundations with the functional movement, those are the discrepancies that come into play where your child will start having difficulties. We're here to catch them, hopefully, way before it happens. I'm so grateful we have so many more babies coming in. That's why we're doing the Super Baby Boot Camp. People don't think that the first day of life is that important to your movement foundations and your functional movements. They really are. So when you're working with your child, functional movement, but also functional movement comes into play with structure, right? I have a certain structure of my body. Again, I mentioned Cirque du Soleil, right? Where, again, my structure, you might say, well, you're a bit too overweight to do Cirque du Soleil. Well, I can move pretty darn good, but I don't think someone would pay to see me move like that. But again, at the end of the day, if I took an x-ray of a female to a female, we're pretty much the same. Our movement vocabulary is different, right? But to say that for a child who's just starting to develop, oh, my child did this or this, that's not the way it should be. We all have a right to an exceptional life. This is why I still see adults. And we need to work on the child's foundational and functional movements. A functional movement literally with a newborn might be here, just getting that opposition to gravity rotation. It might seem so simple, but that will change a child's life versus here, or let's say an IV in the hand. It will change their functional movement. So understanding what functional movements come into play, this is what we're trying to detail out with the movement lesson. So you start seeing how, those little movements, that the attention's in the detail, and they come out to play. So I hope that helps you, and thank you for being here.